Dust hung thick in the attic air as Emma brushed cobwebs from the old trunk. The Wyoming sun bled amber through a slatted window, casting long shadows across forgotten relics. She'd come looking for old tax records. What she found instead stopped her breath. The trunk creaked open with a groan of time. Beneath folded linens and a rusted horseshoe lay a false wooden panel. With careful fingers, she pried it loose. Inside, a single envelope, brown by age, sealed with wax and trembling slightly in her grip. She unfolded the parchment slowly. The handwriting was spidery, but clear. To whoever finds this, my name was never truly Jack Monroe. This is a truth I buried deeper than my name, deeper than any grave. Emma's eyes widened. The signature at the bottom, J.M., April 3rd, 1883. Outside, the prairie wind stirred. Inside, a forgotten life began to speak. The fire had died days ago, but the smell of smoke still clung to Josephine's skin like guilt. She stood at the edge of what used to be her family's homestead, just blackened beams and a scorched Bible left behind. The border skirmish that swept through Kansas in 1866 spared no one, not her father, not her brothers, not even her mother's garden. She buried them with her bare hands, said no prayers. There was no one left to listen. That night, beneath a moonless sky, she stared into a cracked mirror and took the scissors to her hair. Then the bindings, rough linen wound tight across her chest, squeezed away what softness remained. A broad hat, a stolen coat, mud smeared on pale cheeks. By dawn, Josephine Monroe no longer existed. Name? The foreman at the cattle ranch grunted 2 days later. She met his eyes. Voice low. Steady. Jack Monroe. He didn't question it. Too many men out here had ghosts in their eyes. The work was brutal, branding, breaking wild colts, sleeping under stars and storms alike. But as long as she kept her head down and her voice gruff, no one looked too close. Still, every laugh at the fire, every shove on the shoulder, reminded her how fragile her disguise was. At night, when rain scratched the tin roof and lightning cast long shadows on canvas walls, she'd see it. The silhouette on the wall, her own shape, shifting from woman to man, and back again. Wyoming, 1867. The land rolled wide and wind-bitten, and the burning brand ranch sat like a scar on the plains, hard-earned and fiercely kept. Its owner, Clara Cochrane, bore the war on his body, one leg gone below the knee, replaced by a carved hickory peg. He trusted few and tolerated less. Jack rode in during a dust storm, hat low, eyes lower. "Can you ride?" Silas asked. "Better than most," Jack answered. 3 days later, she broke a wild Appaloosa that had thrown 3 men and shattered 1 rib cage. She held on, silent and soaked in sweat, until the beast bowed its neck in defeat. The ranch hands hooped. Silas simply nodded. "Keep your bedroll. You've earned it." It was Clara who brought her water after. Sunlight danced off the tin pail she held, and her hand brushed Jack's as she passed the tin cup. "You don't talk much," Clara said, curious. Jack shrugged, voice dry. "Talking don't break horses." Clara smiled faintly. "Still, you're different. Curiously gentle, I'd say." Jack looked away, heart pounding harder than the stallion had. That night, beneath the stars, Jack stared at the silhouette of the ranch house and knew she'd found more than shelter. She'd found danger. Trouble rode after dusk in the Wyoming territory. Folks whispered the name Hollister riders like a curse. Ghosts on horseback, masked and ruthless. They struck isolated ranches, torching barns, stealing stock, and leaving behind the dead or begging. One moonless night, the burning brand's corral rang out with a frightened whinny. Jack, already half awake from instinct, bolted toward the noise with her rifle. In the barn, she caught a man mid-saddle. They fall in the shadows, grunts, hooves, fists. Jack knocked the thief cold with the butt of her gun, but not before he buried a knife in her side. She staggered into the hayloft, clutching her ribs. Blood soaked her shirt. She ripped a grain sack, tied it tight, and hissed through the pain, alone. Telling anyone meant too many questions. So she stayed quiet. But Silas saw the stiff movements the next morning. The pallor, the careful way Jack saddled her horse. "You've got secrets, Jack," he muttered over a tin of coffee, not unkindly. "And secrets out here will get you killed." Jack nodded, avoiding his eyes. That night, in the firelit barn, she pressed a trembling hand to her bandage, her shirt clutched to her chest, knowing how close the truth had come to bleeding through. The storm came sudden and wild, lightning cracking the sky open like bone, wind howling through canyons. Clara sprinted across the yard, skirts soaked and clinging, seeking shelter in the stables. She shoved open the door and froze. In the flickering lantern light, Jack stood shirtless, struggling to tighten a fresh bandage around her ribs. Blood spotted the cloth. Her hair, damp and loose from its usual tuck, framed a face Clara suddenly saw in full. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not Jack." Jack pulled the shirt close, panic in her breath. "I didn't mean for you to find out." Clara stepped forward, heart hammering. "How long?" "Since Kansas. Since everything I was burned with my family." Clara didn't cry. She sat beside her, knees brushing, and they talked. Of fear, of hiding, of being alone in the world with no choice but reinvention. "You carried all that alone?" Clara murmured, touching the edge of the bandage. Jack nodded. "I had to." In the hush between thunderclaps, Clara leaned in, hand to Jack's cheek, and kissed her, soft, unsure, true. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something unspoken bloomed. Something just as dangerous. Autumn painted the plains in firelight hues when news rode in from the east. The Hollister riders had struck the Silver Spur Ranch, leaving it smoldering. 2 hands dead, 3 horses stolen, and a threat scrawled in ash. "Burning brand is next." Silas wasted no time. By dusk, a posse of 12 rode hard, Jack among them. She knew the risk. One wrong move, one stray wound, and her secret would ride free like an untamed horse. But she couldn't stay behind, not when the fight had come so close. They caught the riders by the ravine at dawn. Gunfire cracked the cold air. Jack rode straight into the fray, covering Silas when his horse went down. She took a bullet to the shoulder, toppled from her saddle, and her hat flew off. In the stunned silence, someone shouted, "That ain't a man!" Bloodied and dazed, Jack stood, braid unraveling, shirt clinging to her chest. For one breathless moment, no one moved. Then she raised her rifle and fired, dropping the last of the Hollisters. The fight was over. But something far worse had begun. Later, as the smoke cleared, Silas approached, face hard as weathered stone. "You made fools of us," he spat. "You lied to every man who trusted you." Jack didn't answer. She couldn't. Only Clara stepped forward, arms crossed. "She saved your life. Doesn't that count for something?" Silas turned away. The others followed. Jack stood alone in the dust, blood on her sleeve, truth in the open, and nowhere left to hide. The courtroom smelled of dust, ink, and judgment. Snow drifted outside the windows, muffling the murmurs of the crowd gathered within. Jack stood alone at the front, hair combed back, jacket too big for her slight frame, shoulders still stiff from the bullet wound. She wasn't on trial for theft or murder, but something more nebulous. Fraud, deception, disgracing decency. The charges read, masquerading as a man, obtaining employment under false pretenses, deceiving good men. Some in town whispered she was a hero. Others demanded she be punished, paraded in shame. Clara rose from the gallery. Her voice, though trembled with fury, rang clear. She worked harder than any man here. She risked her life for this town. She's more of a man than any of you ever dared to be. Gasps echoed. The judge, old and tired of bloodshed, sighed. The court dismisses the charges, he said at last. But this land has its limits. You are not to return to the burning brand or seek further employment here. Clara reached for Jack's hand, gripped it fiercely. Tears rimmed her eyes. "I'll wait," she whispered. Jack smiled, but the ache behind it was real. She turned and walked out, not defeated, but exiled by truth. Spring brought green shoots to the valley, but Jack saw only shadows through the cabin window. The mountains loomed like silent judges, and the wind carried no news. By the flicker of a lone candle, She dipped her pen. The letter flowed in fits and starts, halting truths, stammered regrets, and the weight of all she hadn't said aloud. Clara, I think of you with every sunrise. I remember your voice in the storm, your hand steady on mine. I wish I'd given you more than a stolen moment. I wish I'd had the right to stay. The candle guttered. Jack signed only her initials, sealed the letter in wax, and placed it beneath folded wool in the wooden trunk Clara once gifted her on a shared Christmas. Her fingers lingered on the final line. I loved you not in spite of who I was, but because I could only be true with you. She never mailed it, but she kept it safe. In the spring of 1883, a rancher found John Monroe slumped peacefully in a rocking chair outside a weathered cabin near the Montana border. A rifle leaned beside the door, untouched. The town doctor called a heart failure. No family came forward. The townsfolk dug a grave beneath a cottonwood tree and carved a modest stone. John Monroe, loyal friend, brave rider. Locals swapped stories of the quiet rider who never drank, who helped mend fences without being asked, who read poetry by lamplight and never once started a fight. Some said he was too gentle to have ever been an outlaw. No one guessed the truth. The sealed letter remained in the trunk at the foot of her bed, untouched, unread. Josephine Monroe vanished from the world as she'd lived in it. Hidden in plain sight, her truth folded like parchment beneath layers of dust and silence. The letter trembled in Emma's hands as she placed it on the museum curator's desk, alongside a small, worn tintype of a lean figure in a weathered coat and wide-brimmed hat. The face was solemn, eyes sharp, a trace of softness around the mouth. The curator adjusted her glasses, frowning in fascination. You found this where? In my gray tant's attic, hidden in an old trunk. The name on the letter matches stories from around the Montana border. Whispers about a woman who lived as a cowboy. No one ever proved it. Until now. Weeks later, a new glass case stood beneath soft lighting in the Frontier exhibit. A label read, Women Who Vanished into Men's Boots. The story of Josephine Jack Monroe, 1848 to 1883. Inside, the letter, carefully preserved, the tintype, and the weathered badge she once carried. Visitors passed by, reading the tale of a woman who rewrote her fate in dust and silence. As Emma lingered, her reflection flickered over the glass, merging for a moment with a photograph of Jack. A soft voiceover played above. Some stories aren't just forgotten. They're hidden until someone's brave enough to look. And Jack Monroe, long buried by time, looked back through the glass at last, seen.